Okay, you're all set.
All right, thank you. Thank you for joining the City of Kingston's Common Council at our meeting, at our Laws and Rules meeting. Today is April 21st. And before we begin, we would like to go over a few guidelines to help us navigate the system as efficiently and respectfully as possible. We ask that members of the public and press remain muted and off camera for the length of the meeting. The moderator for tonight's meeting is City Clerk Elisa Tinti, and she reserves the right to mute anyone who unmutes themselves. Council members and city staff will control their own mute button. Good practice would be to mute yourself if you are not speaking to avoid background noise and feedback. If a council member or city staff wishes to speak, they will raise their hands and I will call on members by stating their name clearly for our audio listeners. All our meetings are recorded. Both video and written transcriptions will be made available to the public on the city's website. Although we will not have public speaking tonight, you can sign up to speak at our monthly council meetings. Please email Elisa Tinti to sign up by noon of the day of the meeting. If you can submit written comments for the record by the same deadline, the email address is emtinti@kingston-ny.gov. You can also drop comments off at the drop box located outside of City Hall. We also encourage you to reach out to your committee chairs and your ward's representatives at any time. Clerk Elisa Tinti is the moderator for tonight's meeting, and she has the right to lock and pause the meeting to eject anyone who has behaved inappropriately. Lastly, at tonight's meeting, we have in attendance committee members, myself, Chair Jeffrey Ventura Morel, committee members Rennie Scott Childress, Rita Worthington, Don Tollerman, non-committee council member Michelle Hirsch, and city staff Dan Gartenstein, Mayor Steve Noble, Julie Noble, Kristen Wilson, and City Clerk Elisa Tinti. Thank you for your patience during these difficult times, and on behalf of the Common Council, I wish you and your family good health. I now call this meeting to order at 6:39 p.m. Okay, first, the Mayor Noble is here to speak on item number 4 on the agenda, and to respect his time, I would ask if nobody has any objection to let him go first. So move item number 4 to the top of the agenda. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. Hi, Mayor Noble.
Hi, Jeffrey. Thank you very much for the opportunity tonight. I wanted to just state that the intermunicipal agreement that's before you today is really the kind of culmination of a relationship that started in 2020 as we look to redevelop our relationship with the county and the new county executive. We worked to be able to create a really close working relationship when it comes to economic development activities. We recognize that we need to be able to all work together if we're going to have the city of Kingston and the county be successful in attracting new businesses and supporting the businesses that we have. And so our staffs respectively started meeting together on an ongoing basis. And through that, we identified that this made sense to be able to have a shared services type approach to how we manage our economic development. And so we also learned about different state initiatives to support shared services. And as part of the county's required shared services plan, the last of which we worked on in early 2020, we were able to include this initiative. And now we're at a point where we would like to put it in writing in terms of a shared services agreement, really a memorandum of understanding between the city of Kingston and the county of Ulster, that we will indeed work together, communicate together, and that we will, in lieu of ourselves hiring an economic development director, that we would share resources, save taxpayer dollars, and work directly with the staff that they have. That will allow the county to potentially qualify for shared services funding in the future because of their assistance to us. And so it's really it's a win-win. And this is something that the county legislature recently passed. And so now we would be putting forth to you a resolution as well at the council meeting if it passes through committee tonight. That would be similar to the county's resolution, basically stating that we agree as the city to work in cooperation with Ulster County to be able to further our joint economic development goals. And it will also allow us to leverage the staffing resources that they have to help us further implement new initiatives or grants that may come our way that we would like the county to implement for us, and or support us in funding applications that we have, again, because they have a much larger staff within the county than we do in the city. So that's my ask this evening, is to be able to allow me to sign onto that agreement and again, at no cost to us here at the city of Kingston.
Any questions for the mayor? Don Tollerman?
Hi, thanks. This is Don Tollerman. Thank you, Steve. So I don't really get where the money is here. So, shared cooperation and on calls together, but is there any financial benefit? For instance, we're talking about promoting a citywide stroll right over Memorial Day. And if we wanted to put together a budget for that, to do some marketing, would the county fund that budget? Is there money to fund the budget on, that's marketing something for the city, as an example?
Yeah, at this point, there is no dedicated line for the city of Kingston, through this initiative. There's really, what this initiative does is it has the potential to qualify the county for a shared services grant someday in the future for assisting us. But with the unknowns in the state budget, we're not sure that whether that will be able to come to fruition or not. But what it does, I think, is it allows us to leverage our two governments to be able to find funding to implement projects. And I think one of the things that you've seen, because I know that you've been involved in some of these, is that this will allow the city and the county staff to work closer together on initiatives. And so while there may not be a line item with a budget to be able to support actual dollars, it's really it's actual staff time, which has a value in itself, because county staff will be able to help assist with city projects that would normally not be able to occur without this kind of shared relationship.
But do they have somebody to look for grants, like a Kristen Wilson, that or someone that Kristen can work with, that we can actually target real specific dollars to do things?
Yes, and so they, my understanding is that their director of economic development, Tim Wiedemann, their deputy director is Kate Heidecker, and as well as they have a support staff. And so that's 3 more people than we have dedicated to economic development here in the city. And so I do think that between their team of 3 and the work that we're doing in our community development office and the work that Kristen does with grants, I really do think that, we will see some really positives coming out of that. And Kristen and Mandy from our community development office, they're already having these meetings. And if Kristen, if you want to talk a little bit more already about the work that we're doing together, with the county to kind of leverage some of the grant funding that we've received, that could be helpful.
Sure. So through the one of the things that we're working on together now is the DRI grants and loans program for businesses. And so within that program, we have $600,000 dedicated to that program, and 60,000 of that can be used for administration. And so the grants are facade grants for businesses, home rehab grants, for homes that are in the Uptown Stockade area, and also micro enterprise grants to small businesses. And so the city really doesn't have the capacity to manage those kinds of small loans and grants, whereas the county does. And so Ruth Ann is currently managing the overall grant, but we're working with them, and they're going to develop the application process and do all the advertising to the businesses and get the word out to the businesses about the opportunity, because they're already connected with businesses, whereas those of us in the grants office are not necessarily directly connected with businesses. So it's a real benefit to be working together. And they also have some more expertise in working on grants and loans with businesses than we do. So that's an example of a project that we're working on right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Rita Worthington?
Good evening, Mayor Noble. So looking at the agreement, can you just explain to me what section 1.02 means, foregoing of city funding?
Yeah, and so what we had envisioned was the city, as part of the shared services agreement, would agree to not hire an economic development director at a salary that we could put at, say, $75,000. And so that would really be the shared service, because we would be relying on the county to be able to do that work for us, instead of us having to hire our own economic development director.
Thanks.
Can I say something?
Let's go ahead, Kristen.
I just wanted to note that the cost of the economic development director would be more than 75,000 if you included benefits. So it's really I think a win for the city.
Thank you. Any other questions? So do I have a motion to enter into discussion about the agreement with the county regarding sharing economic development? Motion by Rennie Scott Childress. To have a second? Second by Don Tollerman. Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, so I'll read hearing no further discussion, I'll read the committee report I have. Authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with Ulster County regarding sharing economic development services as per attached. Do I have a motion? Rennie, you're muted. You say something, Rennie? You're muted.
You already have the motion.
Okay, so
Just a question of voting if nobody wants to
okay.
discuss.
So hearing no discussion, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you all very much. Have a good rest of the night, okay?
Thank you, you too. Okay, the next item on the agenda, so now we're moving back to the regular order of the agenda. The next item is a memorializing resolution from the CAC. Communication was sent by Julie Noble. Hi, Julie, would you like to speak on that?
Sure, thank you for giving me the floor and for letting me come to the meeting. So I'm here representing the Kingston Conservation Advisory Council this evening. I'm the chair of that commission. And the resolution that we have before you is a memorializing resolution, which is in relation to the Department of Environmental Protection's releases of water from the Ashokan Reservoir, which has a direct impact on the Esopus Creek, all throughout the lower Esopus, but particular to Kingston, which is why I brought it forward here. So the Department of Environmental Protection manages releases from the Ashokan Reservoir in order to manage the turbidity levels in the reservoir. As you know, they provide a substantial amount of water to New York City, and they have a filtration avoidance permit. In order to do that, they need to maintain the turbidity levels. With the more storms we're having, more erosion is caused and more turbidity gets into the reservoir. In order to maintain their levels that they need for their water quality, they release that turbidity into the Esopus Creek, the lower Esopus. And so what we have been seeing for the past several months is incredibly high levels of turbidity, which looks like muddy creek water. And so the Esopus, the waters along it, the boundary along it, the land around the Esopus is identified directly in our open space plan as valuable for recreation, for habitat. Certainly the turbidity levels have a high impact on light penetration for plants, on complications for aquatic animals, aquatic life, and it reaches all the way to the Hudson River. Now, we don't take our water from the Hudson River, but many communities, 7 communities in our area do. And this has seen direct impact on those neighboring communities, including Poughkeepsie and others that are very close to us. So of late, in order to continue with their consent order, the Department of Environmental Protection had to update or apply for an application for a new speedies permit. And that is managed through the DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation. In that process, they had to put together an environmental impact statement, a draft environmental impact statement. And in doing so, we're supposed to evaluate alternatives to this muddy release process that they use as their regular protocol, look for other solutions, evaluate more about the chemistry of it and the impacts, and involve the community. And we as a CAC and many other organizations in the area, including Riverkeeper and certainly Ulster County and many other communities along the Esopus, feel as though this evaluation was done insufficiently. And so the Conservation Advisory Council is bringing forward to you all to a resolution to basically hold the state's feet to the fire, to have the DEP really improve, work on these insufficient recommendations that they put forward, and for the Department of Environmental Conservation to actually hold them more accountable, so that we as a community along the Esopus and other communities that have direct and indirect relationships with the Esopus will not see what we have seen. Now, what you may have noticed is that this turbidity level kind of goes in waves. So they will release, and then we'll see really high turbidity levels, and then they'll stop the releases, and then it'll go down. And so we're seeing this incredible fluctuation. And now this time of year, as irrigation and other actions are happening along the Esopus, obviously not in Kingston, but in our neighboring communities where agriculture is a big deal, certainly where we get a lot of our local produce from. This has impacts that may seem not directly related to Kingston, but in so many ways are. And so I would like to ask that you consider this resolution.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Julie. Any questions? Don Tollerman?
Hi, Julie. Thanks very much. So I was earlier this last year very involved in the Lower Esopus and opening it up for recreation. And we did, so it's like we spend money and time clearing the large wood from the stream to invite people to use it. And then the city just dumps it, pollutes it like this. So I'm really thankful for your resolution. However, you said you hold their feet to the fire. Does this really do anything? I mean, we should do it just because it's the right thing to do, but what else can we do? I mean, can someone pick up they have a huge office in Midtown, DEP, right? So, can we meet with some of the people there and, saying, hey, let's take a walk. Look at this. Look at what you're doing to our city and other cities down. It's a 32-mile stretch of water, that's up and back, top to bottom of Manhattan, like up and down, up and down. I don't think people don't realize how long this tributary is. And so that's my question to you. Is there something else that we can do that will be more than just a resolution that they're going to ignore?
I mean, you can reach out to them individually. I know that our administration and the county administration and the county's Department of the Environment have been actively advocating for improvements.
Do you have someone at their office here in the city, or does Steve know someone that we can shake down?
I haven't had direct communication with folks in the local office. I can't speak to whether or not he has or not.
All right. Well, I'd be happy to make some, calls if it's just that, yes, the resolution is great. It's just I want to do something that's more impactful.
Patrick O'Reilly? Patrick, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I did just get a note from the mayor. He did say he has a meeting with all of the supervisors and the Department of Environmental Protection next week.
Well, that's great.
That's
Thank
good.
you. Go ahead, Patrick.
Hi, Julie. Patrick O'Reilly. Wondering, are there any solutions for this, Julie? I mean, it looks to me about 9 million people get their drinking water from the Ashokan Reservoir, according to a little Google search I did. I mean, that's a lot of people that get drinking water. And is this the only way they can clear that turbidity up, is to dump it into the Esopus, or is there other solutions that you know of?
So I don't know all the full scientific background, but my understanding is that it is an operational decision on the DEP's part that they choose to release the sediment-filled water from the West Basin as opposed to the clean water from the East Basin. And the East Basin is where they draw the drinking water from. So they're choosing, there's the two separate basins, they're choosing the more turbid one to release the water from. There could be, I guess in my understanding, there could be some sort of settling or transfer of the turbidity possibly between them, and then they do a release. I don't know exactly how that functions, and I don't want to misspeak, but I do know that they are operationally choosing to send down the more turbid water. I think the thing is they need to really evaluate the solutions, and I don't think that they have evaluated the solutions enough.
Yeah, is this what they've been doing since the reservoir was built? Is this how they've been operating?
They have been. They have continued to have to operate this way as long as they've been under the filtration avoidance, which they have. It's just that more and more we're having more extreme weather events where we're having a long period of drought and then a lot of rain all at the same time, and that's creating more erosion in the watershed. And so it's having a bigger impact.
So what you're asking is that they do a better job at researching this topic. Is that what you're asking, Julie?
Yes.
Well, that's understandable. Thank you.
Thank you. And Julie, you mentioned a lot of organizations are signed on to this. Do you know if any other municipalities are passing similar measures?
In terms of passing actual resolutions, I don't know. I know that the towns of Ulster and Saugerties and Poughkeepsie, at least those certainly have voiced their concern. I can't speak to others. I don't know for sure. As I said, I did get a note from the mayor that he will be meeting with the other supervisors. I certainly know that the county is very concerned, but I cannot speak to whether or not anyone has passed any resolutions. I'm sorry, I didn't research that.
No worries. Thank you.
This resolution, I will say the resolution language is drafted from Riverkeeper, and they've been working with communities in this area, but I don't know specifically who's passed any.
Okay. Don, do you have a question? Okay. Any other questions? All right. The committee. Patrick, go ahead.
Julie, I don't have it in front of me. Who is this from? Is this from you or is it from your committee?
This is from the Conservation Advisory Council. I'm the chair, so I'm moving it forward on their behalf.
Okay, thank you.
Right, do we have a motion to move into discussion? Motion by Don Tollerman, second by Ronnie Scott Childress. Any discussion? Okay, so the committee report I have is memorializing resolution urging the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to exercise its authority and responsibilities for enforcing state and federal laws to protect water quality as per attached. Any discussion on that, Patrick?
Yeah, obviously this is becoming, a big issue, and with changes in the climate, obviously, this may be getting worse and worse and worse, and we're not sure. But if Julie says that they could do more, and they're not doing it, and they're destroying our the waterway that runs through our hometown, I think we should do whatever we can to make sure that they're doing everything that they can to make sure that that water is, not damaging, like Julie said, the wildlife, the even a recreation for our own people in the city of Kingston. Even getting out there on that waterway is a fun and wonderful thing. We swam in it when we were kids, and I'd love to see it cleaned up and as pristine as it can be. So I'm a yes vote.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, hearing no discussion, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Okay, passes unanimously.
Thank you all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Julie. Have a good evening. Who made the motion? I forgot to write it down. Patrick? Oh, Don. Okay, thank you. Okay, and my apologies, I actually skipped one item on the agenda. So we have, I got confused with the order. We have item number 1 is the intermunicipal agreement with George Washington School regarding a bike shelter. And we have Kristen Wilson to speak on that. Hi, Kristen.
Hi, how are you again?
Yeah. You're on.
So this is it's a pretty simple agreement. This is part of the Henry Street Safe Routes to School project, and included in the original grant application and project design was the plan to install a covered bike shelter at the George Washington School. It would be located somewhere on the lawn in front of the school, likely near the door that's to the right of the auditorium. And New York State DOT requires us to have an intermunicipal agreement for them to install the infrastructure on property that is not City of Kingston property. And so that's what's been presented to you. The agreement has been passed by the Board of Education. And so now we're coming to you to see if you will agree with this agreement.
Any questions? Patrick O'Reilly.
Hi, Kristen. Patrick O'Reilly.
Hi.
Who's in charge of the maintenance of this bike rack?
It would be I believe it would be the county. Or I'm sorry, not the county, the school district. And they need to have the bike rack for a certain number of years, which is listed in the agreement. I'll have to actually open it up again.
Yeah, would you? Because I thought the city of Kingston had to maintain it. And
Yeah,
they would maintain it within 3 days of any complaint.
let me check. Sorry, it's been a while since I submitted this communication. Yes, you're correct. It will be the city of Kingston that will be responsible because we are installing it.
So that would be DPW or,
Yeah, I
or
believe,
Parks and Rec?
I think that would be a question for them.
Okay,
I think it would be DPW because Parks and Rec, I don't know that they maintain bike racks as often as DPW would. So, but that would be a question for them.
okay. Any other questions?
What's the life of this bike rack? Is there a life, does they give you a warranty on this bike rack, Kristen?
Yes, it's, and that's also in the agreement, 21 to 36. I think it's, let's see here. I think it was 15 years.
A warranty 15 years, or the fact that we have to keep it up for 15 years? We have to maintain it for 15 years, or the 15-year warranty?
It was based on the lifespan of 15 years. So our engineer thought that it was potentially, it would potentially have the ability to have a lifespan of 20 years, but we went with the shortest lifespan that DOT would tolerate, just to play it on the safe side.
So it can be removed after 15.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, do I have a motion to enter into discussion? Motion by Rita Worthington. Is there a second? Second by Patrick O'Reilly. Okay, any discussion? Go ahead, Patrick O'Reilly. You're muted, Pat.
Has the DPW been informed that they're going to be taking care of this bike rack for 15 years? And what do they have to say about that, I wonder?
They have been included on project meetings. I have not spoke to them specifically about this topic within the last month or so.
Is it along the route? Is it along the bike path? Is it along one of our bike trails?
No, it's at the GW school, and the purpose of the Henry Street Safe Routes to School project is to provide walking and better, safer walking and bicycling access to the GW school from Broadway. The whole street will be repaired, and the idea is that if kids are riding their bikes to school, then they would have a place to park them.
But Kristen, there will also be a bike path along Henry Street, right?
There will not. We have changed the design because of the issues with utilities and properties. It was very difficult to be able to implement the multi-use pathway, which was the original idea that we had. And so now what we have gone to is 6-foot sidewalks on each side of the road. So they're wider. The typical sidewalks are 5 feet wide, so they're a bit wider. And it would make it easier for a child and their mother to, for the child to be on the bicycle and the mother to be walking alongside of the child.
Thank you. Patrick O'Reilly?
Or father.
Can we ride bicycles on sidewalks in the city of Kingston?
A child can.
Oh, a child can?
Yes.
Oh, that's good.
I think it's up to, I want to say age 12 or 14. I'd have to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Also, it would still be safe, you're saying, for a child to drive their bicycle to school up Henry Street.
Well, it would
they'd
be
on the sidewalk.
Yeah, it would be safer because they would be on the sidewalk, and currently the sidewalks are not wide enough. They're obviously very difficult on Henry Street. Which results in, they would also be ADA accessible. So if somebody was in a wheelchair, They wouldn't end up in the road. And then the road would also be paved, and the intersections would be improved. So there will be not bump outs, but paint at the intersections that make it look like a bump out. And so that the intersections will be safer. And you can still ride your bicycle in the roadway if you're an adult, and you can still, be on the street as an adult bicyclist.
So
But
this
for-
is gonna be next to the front door of the school, correct?
Yes,
Now, can anyone park their bike there, or only people that are associated with the school?
no, that's actually part of the agreement. That was something that we went back and forth with the school district, and it has, because of the source of funding, with federal funding source, anybody has to be able to park their bike there. However, I think we did include in the agreement, some sort of provision of a certain number of days, if the bike was left there, that we can remove it.
30.
Yeah, 30 days. We don't want it to be, somebody's home bike parking.
Okay. Any other discussion? All right, so I have a committee report authorizing the mayor to enter into an intermunicipal agreement with George Washington School regarding a bike shelter as part of the Henry Street Safe Routes to School project as per attached. Patrick O'Reilly.
Kristen, is the George Washington School in our historic district or not? Do you know?
It's on the very edge of the historic district.
Is it in it?
No, it's not in it.
The George Washington School is not in the historic district? Because I know right next door to it is a stone house.
Yeah, it's not in the historic district though.
It's not. Has the fact that it's next to a stone house been included in the plans for this thing? It looks pretty modern. And did anybody from the historical society or take a look at this and make sure it fits the character of that house next door?
No. However, I mean, the picture that I put in the letter is an example of what it could be similar to. That was the bike rack that was chosen by the school at the time. Their school colors are blue, and they already have a bench outside of the school and some other things that are that color. And so we were looking to match that. It also won't be right next to the stone house. It'll be on the school grounds. So I think it may match the character of the actual school building. But if you have concerns, the actual style of the bike rack is not set in stone, and the historic district folks could contact me.
Well,
Actually,
I know that that's a historic building next to it, and I'm just always thinking about that fact. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay.
Hello,
Any
this
other
is Tony
question?
David. Hello.
Oh, hi,
Can you hear
Tony.
me?
Yes, you have
Hi.
a question, Tony?
Just one question here. And Christian, if you're right, if I've heard you right, you're saying that people that are not in the school can use this bike rack as well,
Yes.
and during the school day.
Yes.
Well, I don't know how that could be if they're not students of the school or faculty. They would not be allowed on the property during school time, so they would not be able to access this bike rack if it's on school property. And nobody would be able to come on that school property unless they're, or should be able to, unless they're a student and faculty. So
Well,
that needs to be looked at.
isn't anybody allowed to walk up to the front door of the school?
Yeah, but you're saying they can leave their bikes there. And I don't see how, they would be able to walk up on that grass, that would be allowed to walk up and off on the property if they're not students. And I think, that could be a problem if somebody's walking up and down and, if the bike's not secure or just messing with somebody else's bike on there. And so I thought I heard that right. I would just, I'm assuming you've been in communication with the school, and does the school know that people outside of the school can use this bike rack as well during school time?
Yes, that's written into the agreement that was presented. And that is something that we did discuss. In the communications that I had with the school district, we felt it would be very unlikely for that sort of scenario to happen. If there are adult bikes that are going to be parked there, it's likely going to be parents who are visiting the school. And I don't know that there's evidence. I mean, there is a bike rack at the school that is, it's a small bike rack, but I have never seen an overflow of bicycles parked there for
I'm sorry, go on.
Just for other reasons than, I've seen children's bikes and, the occasional parent bike parked there. So I would be surprised if that were, and I think the school district agreed.
My only concern is that, again, that's can open up potential and problems if you have someone who's, for whatever reason, is going off and on the property and putting their bike there. And then the school would not be able to then come out and say, you can't be on this property, and say it's an older person or whatever, just walking around. And now people are concerned if this is an intruder or not on the property. And they come out and saying, well, you can't be on this property. And then it's like, well, it's been said that this bike rack, anybody can use this bike rack. And so how would you deter that? That is what my concern is, that we need to look at that a little bit more, because if we do allow that, then that means if somebody's walking around on that building, on that property, boom, that can trigger in place or a school safety protocol, and because a stranger's on the grounds, and then law enforcement or wherever comes, and then it finds out, well, it states here that I can use this bike rack anytime. I mean, I think that needs to be looked in a little bit more, and maybe go back to the school and confirm with them that this is a possibility. And so what's going to happen if somebody does come in there? And you also, you got.
If I could just jump in for a second. The language that Kristen is referring to necessarily only applies to people who are lawfully on the property. Okay, and any intermunicipal agreement that we enter into with the district doesn't have any impact on whether or not someone is lawfully or unlawfully on the property. Someone who is unlawfully on the property doesn't gain lawful status by going and trying to put their bicycle in the bicycle rack. So if they're not allowed to be there, they're not allowed to be there.
I also just want to say that I think it's a non-negotiable point, because this agreement was modeled after an agreement provided by the New York State DOT, and it's a requirement of the funding source that all, any infrastructure that's built with public money must be made available to the public.
And I also think you have to recognize that saying that members of the public are not allowed on school property during the school day is not 100% accurate. There are restrictions with regard to when members of the public can be on the property, when they can be in the building. And again, all of that is dictated by law. And if someone is not allowed to be on school district property for one reason or another, they can't access the property just to get to the bike rack.
Michelle Hirsch was next, and then Patrick.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Jeffrey, that, this is also a site for voting for the city of Kingston. So people should be able to use the bike rack when they go there and when it's a, Board of Elections voting site. So.
Thank you. Go ahead, Patrick O'Reilly.
Tony and I work in the school every day, and we have a heightened sense of security at the school. Tony and I, if we saw someone walking around the school near the windows, near the front of the school, who we didn't recognize, we'd be concerned. And just to put something up that actually promotes that, someone, a stranger being on the building. These are our children, these are our children. Is kind of a difficult thing for us to wrap our heads around because we're very safety conscious. And to have strangers, I'm not saying everybody's a stranger, but to have people that aren't in the school community on the school property able to access a bike rack that's near the children. I don't know. It's kind of scary for Tony and I, I'm sure, because we know it. We live there. We work there. We see the kids playing on the front lawn, and we can imagine, the worst scenario. That's all.
Kristen, the school board already signed this agreement, you said?
Yes, they've already adopted it.
Okay. Alderman Scott Childress?
Yeah, I was going to make that point. If the school system is already signed and adopted, that's taken care of. The concern, we certainly share the concern of having strangers walking onto school property. On the other hand, George Washington is in a place where there is just not a huge amount of demand for public bike parking. So, I don't think that this is going to be much of an issue. I can imagine somebody might ride their bike to Pie for the People, which is across from George Washington, but I can't imagine they would be walking their bike all the way over to the bike rack to park it there and then go to Pie for the People. So I just don't see a huge rush of members of the public. And I see a big benefit for students who might be riding their bikes to school.
Just takes one, Brandy, just takes one.
Yeah, if we think that way, then we're never going to do anything.
Rita Worthington?
Well, these are our children.
Hello? Can I speak again?
Yes, Rita's next, and then you can speak, Tony.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So, yeah, I kind of agree with Rennie is with regard to, I live around the corner from George Washington School, and the way that it's situated down there, I can't see people just because there's a bike rack there that they're going to go there and park their bike. I think that if the school system has already signed on it, this is something that they took into consideration. And so, I'm trying to look at what's down by George Washington where an adult would just readily go there and park their bike. You have the closest store is further down going south toward Wall Street. And the only other thing around there are houses. There's nothing really there for someone to just come there and park. I think it's a non-starter. I understand the safety issue. I'm also taking into account what Michelle said about it is a voting site. People may walk up there to vote, park their bike for 5 minutes and then leave. I don't see, while school is in session, I really don't see adults just coming there and parking their bikes there, knowing that the bike rack is there for kids. If with the security issue, then we could say that about every school in Kingston. We should be worried about everything then, as far as if we think that someone's going to come there and make it more non-secure for our kids. So that's just me. I'm not being insensitive to you, Pat. You're a teacher, Tony. You're a teacher. I'm not, but I am around the corner from George Washington. I have there's a tree that is on the lawn of George Washington School, that tree was planted in honor of my daughter, Janisa, who died when she was in George Washington School. And so they planted a tree in memoriam, and people walk up to it all the time and just look at it. And I just haven't heard of no one's tried to pull the tree up. No one's, harmed it or anything like that. They respect it. And I think that they'll respect the bike rack as well. Just my thoughts.
Thank you. Kristen, do you want to answer to that?
I didn't have an answer. I was just going to additionally comment that, I think the hope is that the bike rack will be full with kids' bikes during the school day. So maybe there won't be spots. I don't know that, but that would be the point of doing the project, is to provide a nice place for kids to park their bikes.
Okay. Tony Davis and then Rennie Scott Childress. Tony, are you on? Did we lose Tony? I don't see his number. Okay, Rennie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think Kristen's exactly right. The idea is to have a rack for the kids so they can ride their bikes to school and feel that they've left them there safely. And if they're used at other times of day, that's perfectly fine. I can't, and I don't see somebody using the bike rack if they were going to engage in nefarious purposes to use the bike rack to get into the school. There would be other ways of doing that. So I don't see it, the safety of our children, of course, is paramount, but I just don't see a bike rack as being the mode for somebody to use to get in there to do harm. So I think, I'm definitely in favor of the bike rack.
Okay, any other discussion? All right, hearing no more discussion, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you, Kristen. This was a very interesting discussion, and
Yeah, it was
a lot about bike racks.
than I anticipated. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good night.
You too. Okay, and I see that we have Dennis Doyle from the Ulster County Planning Board on the call. He wanted to speak on one item on the accessory dwellings. Just in order to respect his time, would the committee mind letting him speak now, even though that's not next on the agenda? Okay. Hi, Dennis, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And I'll try to be brief. I think everyone recognizes the fact that what we're going through and experiencing as a county and certainly as a city is a housing crisis, and there's no other way to put that. And it's not going to essentially change unless we start to think about public policy initiatives that will help to ease that crisis. Many communities statewide and certainly nationally have looked at ways to make their existing housing stock work harder. And one of the things that you start to think about when you look at that is the ability to essentially allow accessory dwelling units. We are currently looking at accessory dwelling unit amendments on a countywide basis. And we're seeing many of the communities in the county begin to rethink their accessory dwelling unit regulations. And I would say that a lot of the communities in the county have much more, even their existing regulations are much more less onerous and more user friendly than what we see in the city of Kingston. So what we're urging the city to do is to take a look at these what they call ADUs, accessory dwelling unit regulations. And I believe the last time I spoke to the council, we were talking about some of the things that the city could consider relative to helping to ease the housing crisis. And one of those things that I did mention was accessory dwelling units. The other thing, and I know that we're currently looking at amendments to your zoning statute with respect to short-term rentals, and we think that the city has found a fairly elegant way to essentially deal with the short-term rental issue. We do have some issues with it, but it's a fairly elegant solution to dealing with short-term rentals that you're proposing. We would hope that you would come up with a similar elegant resolution with respect to the accessory dwelling units, and allow them to essentially be permitted in all the districts that you're where you currently have housing, and not to have any density restrictions or other restrictions associated with them. The other thing that we're concerned about is that there are barriers. There are barriers to entry into accessory dwelling units when you start going through the review processes. We think that these should be an as of right use. We believe that accessory dwelling units, particularly those in existing buildings, when you have water and sewer, that as the city does, that these should be as of right uses, and they should be ministerial with the building inspector or the zoning enforcement officer, essentially providing the necessary review from the building code perspective and any of the other criteria that you want to add. One of the things that you should be aware of, if you're not, and I'm pretty sure that your attorney has advised you, that the state is already looking at preempting local zoning when it comes to accessory dwelling units. They're looking at a similar crisis statewide. And so there is a good reason to do that, to think about what you're doing, what you're proposing to do. The other thing I would say is that there are some concerns that get expressed in terms of what happens to the neighborhood if you allow accessory dwelling units. I want you to think about what's happened to household size over the years. Back in the 1970s, the household size in those times was about 3.75 people per household. It's less than 2.25 people per household now. So when you start to think of the size of these single family residences that exist in the city, they're severely underutilized. Most of them are 3 and 4 bedrooms, and they literally have 2 people in them. And when you begin to look at that, the idea of having accessory dwelling units makes a whole lot of sense. The other thing that you can think about is that, I'll give you an example in California. In California, they're actually encouraging people for temporary accessory dwelling units to house people, they call them echo cottages, to house people that are sick or related to the family, such as grandmothers, mothers, or other invalid people, that they can live adjacent to a family and their caregiver. And those are things that you may want to consider. I would hope that the city would adopt a highly progressive accessory dwelling units statute, continuing your leadership with respect to other progressive things that are currently happening in the city. So I'm willing to take questions about this. If anybody has any particular concerns, I hope I would be able to address them. Thank you.
Dennis, if I could just jump in for a second and backtrack. We had sent the county the proposed legislation, and for clarification, that is the beginning of the process, and it was contemplated as the city taking steps towards more comprehensive revisions and more comprehensive steps with regard to accessory dwelling units. I know that the county received the proposed legislation, and you and I spoke about the county's written response to that. We have not received that yet. Has that been drafted, and are we expecting that shortly? And can you speak at all to what that response is going to say?
So the short answer, Dan, is that we're waiting for an official referral from the city. We haven't gotten that to date. It's my understanding. I spoke to my referral review agency, and my understanding is it will be on this month's or the May agenda, but it didn't make the April agenda. So we'll respond in that. You have comments back from us as staff, but they aren't board's comments. So I can speak to some of the staff comments, which we mentioned, the idea that, we should think about these as of right uses rather than, and particularly not requiring them to have special permits. There's no reason for them to be required to have special permits. The the point being is that special permits require public hearings. That's another delay. It's additional expense. It doesn't really accomplish anything that you couldn't accomplish through site plan review. And site plan review, we would hope that the city would waive public hearings for site plan review for ADUs, or not require site plan review at all, and just allow the zoning enforcement officer or the code enforcement officer to make the determination. And if he has any reservations, then you could require site plan review on that. I would say that, you know, there are other impediments that communities put in place, and those are minimum sizes. So you want to be realistic about minimum sizes. I mean, we want to see something perhaps no less than you don't want to see minimum sizes established that are greater than 400 square feet for sure. And looking at maximum sizes, there's some things that you can think about with respect to maximum sizes. And generally, what we've seen is about 50% of the primary dwelling is a maximum size. You run into considerations if you run over, I believe it's 500 square feet, you run into considerations with respect to the New York State Building Code, which requires that the occupancy class may change. So you may hear some feedback from your building code folks that's saying, well, it can't be more than 500 feet. Well, yes, it can. It's just that the occupancy class code changes. So you're not restricted in that sense. We'd like to see you continue to think about allowing them an accessory dwelling unit in detached structures, such as your garages or other things, or even new construction. And last but not least is, we certainly want you to think that if you're going to allow accessory dwelling units, that one, they don't become short-term rentals, and two, you may want to think about actually imposing some sort of affordability criteria on those units, at least for a period of years. The town of Esopus is currently writing a short-term rental, is currently rewriting their ADU regulations, and they're looking at essentially requiring them to be no short-term rentals for a minimum of 5 years. And we're having discussions with them as in terms of those short-term rentals. I mean, those accessory dwelling units. My apologies. Those accessory dwelling units should be affordable, and you start down the affordability discussion with respect to the HUD fair market rent.
So for clarification, you have and we have spoken about the current proposal, and my understanding is it's county's position that it's nice that we are addressing this issue, but we are not going or proposing to go even close to far enough.
Say that one more time, Dan.
That basically the county is supporting us taking steps to address accessory dwelling units, but you do not believe that we are going far enough with this proposal, and that in the future we have to go significantly further. I never like to use the term significantly or far enough. I think that when I look at these things from a staff perspective, we look at what are you trying to protect and what are you trying to do. And when we start this review, one of the things that we think the city needs to do is make its existing housing stock work harder. In order to do that, we think that the ADU statute should apply citywide. You shouldn't sort of carve out, residential districts and say, well, we're not going to allow them in this residential district. The other thing, I think that you can write enough regulation in terms of trying to think about those quality of life issues, which you're talking about as it relates to short-term rentals. You can write that into the code requirements or the requirements under the ADUs to make sure that happens. And then you start to think about, this is not a lot of back and forth. The planning process, and the reason you go through a planning board is it's an iterative process. You go back and forth about, we should do this versus that. And you can think about, when you do these things, that there's not really a lot of back and forth here. You're going to put in an existing structure, and it has water and sewer. You're really just talking about code compliance. We're really not talking about a lot of design issues. You want to have something special with respect to your historic districts, or you want to have something special with respect to historic structures. Sure, but you can accomplish that without putting every accessory dwelling unit application through that process. And that's what you should do. And that's what we're going to urge you to do. Okay, and I'm sorry for, dominating the floor at this point, and I just want to set the stage before the council members actually ask you some questions. one of the issues that came up at the city planning board meeting and has also come up in front of this board relates to maximum size. And what you had indicated was up to 50% of the occupied dwelling. The discussion of maximum size invited concerns with regard to people using the accessory dwelling unit to basically turn a single family residence into a two-family residence, and how you differentiate between the primary and the secondary use if you're talking about a 50-50 split.
Yeah, and the numbers are, up to is clearly what I would say to you, clearly they're accessory dwelling units. And by definition, they need to be accessory to the primary use. So when you start to think about this, if you're taking a 3-bedroom unit or a 4-bedroom unit and you're carving it out, you could have one. It's not the size that is as of concern as much as the number of bedrooms. That's my opinion anyway. In terms of trying to make something accessory. And the example I would give you is you consider garages accessory uses and you don't restrict the size of a garage. And I've seen some garages that are actually bigger than the house.
Okay, and then you also spoke about the affordability issue and potentially including affordability requirements. Can you speak about the relation or the natural relation between accessory dwelling units and the affordable housing market, and how accessory dwelling units naturally provide those type of units that we're talking about currently being missing from the market?
Sure. And typically, when you look at accessory dwelling units, they run cheaper than essentially apartment units run, and they're used as they can be used for homeowners to essentially provide for security at their house, to provide for somebody that almost like a caretaker function in many instances. And in some instances, the homeowner could actually move into the accessory dwelling unit and rent the larger dwelling unit out. That we've seen that occur as well. But they typically operate as being more affordable than typical apartment units, because the homeowner is not looking at this as a quote investment opportunity and a return on investment. They're looking at it as essentially a way to sort of make ends meet, or to provide housing for some of their relatives or other individuals that are related to the family.
And then the final question that was discussed at the planning board meeting last night was concerns about eliminating or reducing limitations based on availability of off-street parking. And for the council's information, the state proposal that Dennis referred to specifically includes provisions that off-street parking requirements cannot be an impediment to developing accessory dwelling units. Can you just speak to that concern? Because members of this group also expressed that when this first was raised.
Yeah, I can. I think I go back to the idea of what's happened to household size, where you had 3 kids and 2 parents that were working, and they all had and 4 of them had cars. And now literally all of the kids have left. One of the parents is no longer working, and you're essentially saying to yourselves, well, even if you want to put an accessory dwelling unit in, you have to provide the necessary parking for it. So one of the I just think that it's a burden that you wouldn't put on. It's a burden that you don't put on the single family homeowner in terms of making sure that they have parking for all the cars in the family. And I think it's a similar thing that you should think about with respect to the burden you're putting on the accessory apartment unit. I'll just leave it at that. I'll leave it at that way. The other thing is the city is now looking at or has adopted the ability for people to rent parking spaces in your municipal lots. So you have that kind of availability as well in terms of parking spaces in your municipal lots. And the city has control with respect to on-street parking, particularly during snowstorms, et cetera, so that people need to move their cars and get them off the street. Those are things that you start to think about and start to say, is it worth the while when you have a housing crisis to start to say that you can't site an accessory dwelling unit because you don't have enough parking?
And thank you, Dennis, for appearing this evening. I know I gave you very little notice, and I'm done.
Thank you. I just have a quick question, Dennis. You mentioned the state is considering legislation. Now, is this something we should wait for? Wouldn't their legislation, if it's further reaching than what we propose, would the state's legislation override whatever we pass? So should we be waiting to see what that looks like first?
My first reaction is it's the city has the crisis, and waiting for the state is not something that I would advise. I think that the city has a significant opportunity to essentially begin to start to look at its housing stock and begin to find ways to make it harder. I would say this, that if the legislation passes as proposed, there would be a preemption. There would be a preemption. So you can look at the legislation and start to think of that as what sections are you prepared to live with and what sections are you aren't, and then wait for the state to preempt you. But I would not hesitate and say that we're not going to do anything with respect to accessory dwelling units, and we're going to wait for the state. And I would add that the city's accessory dwelling restrictions are severe. They're simply not allowed in many of the residential districts. And that's just, in a housing crisis, that's something you should address.
And Jeffrey, if I could just jump in on that as well.
Tom.
One piece of the state legislation that you need to be aware of is it specifically says that if it is adopted, any local provisions that are inconsistent with them are deemed to be void and unenforceable. So we don't really have a choice if and when it's adopted. Our restrictions on accessory dwelling units at that moment are completely off the table and completely unenforceable. So this is an attempt to start moving towards where we believe this ultimately will be going, which is a much more liberal and permissive approach to this issue. But that could be a year down the line, that could be 2 years down the line.
Okay.
And the pain or the adjustment that we're going to have to make if the legislation gets adopted will be significantly less if we start taking steps in this direction now.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. When do we think that the state is going to adopt that? So thank you for answering that. Alderwoman Hirsch and then Rennie Scott Childress.
I just wanted to thank Mr. Doyle for coming tonight. I'm the one that actually introduced the original legislation to Laws and Rules and created a presentation. And I just think that it's important that we act before the state does. I mean, there's a lot of municipalities that have an outright ban, and we do allow it in some of our zoning areas. So we should just broaden the scope of what we allow.
Thank you. Alderman Scott Childress and then Patrick O'Reilly.
Yeah, so again, thank you, Dennis, for coming tonight. We appreciate it. So the state legislation is already been proposed. I mean, is there a copy of it we can look at?
Sure. It's a Senate. I have it to send in the Assembly. I'd be happy to send it.
That'd be great, because I think what would be really helpful would be for us to look through and see, and compare it to what we're contemplating now, and then consider if there are other elements that we'd like to introduce. Then could you remind me, what was that figure you gave about the average number of persons and how it's fallen in the last couple of decades?
And please, I haven't looked at some of these numbers in 20 years. So as I recall, there was about 3.41% or 3.4 people per household in the 70s and 80s. And it's dropped down to around 2.25 or 2.4%. So you've lost an entire person per household.
I was wondering where that person went to.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you start placing that out over 67,000 housing units in the county, and you lose that person and you start saying, well, we still have the same population, then you start to think about how many more housing units you have. And take 2 divided by 67, you start to think about the number of units you need to just essentially stay even in terms of your housing.
And Dennis, if I can just jump in for a second, I can get them the bill. I don't need, like the county, I don't need to put another thing on your plate.
Thank you.
I believe that the bill has already been forwarded to them at a previous meeting, but I have a copy of it and I can certainly send a link to all of them tomorrow. So you don't have to worry about that.
Thank you, Deanne.
Yeah, the slide deck that I sent out to everybody with that presentation had that information on that bill.
Yeah, I think it was posted on the current agenda, but if not, it's on last month's. You can look it up on the website. Patrick O'Reilly?
Can I speak, Jeffrey, when I get a chance?
Yes, so Patrick and then Tony.
Dennis, thanks for coming. So informative. I love to hear you speak. I do have a question about as of right zoning or as of right development. Could you go in and explain that? I know a lot of people are concerned that that this, and I know you've addressed some of those issues, that this may be abused, people just trying to build multiple units on their property, things like that. And I was just wondering how as of right zoning or as of right development works.
Sure. Let me give you an example in the city of Kingston as of right use. Single family residence. All I have to do is go down to the building inspector, prove that I can meet the zoning requirements in terms of density, et cetera, and some of the other technical requirements. I pull the building permit and I review and I build my house. Planning board's not involved. Common Council's not involved. Zoning Board of Appeals is not involved. And in many instances, outside of the historic areas, there are no other commissions or boards that are involved at the city level. So an as of right use with respect to ADU simply says that you have a set of criteria that you have to meet for an ADU. You go down, you go to the zoning enforcement officer, building inspector, and you go through and you say, this is what I want to do. He checks the check boxes, and you go ahead and you build your accessory dwelling unit. That's an as of right use. There are as of right uses that also essentially say you can go through one additional layer, and that would be site plan review. And site plan review is generally about public safety issues and quality of life issues. There's not a lot of public safety issues and quality of life issues associated with accessory dwelling units if they're built in the existing structure. And their regulations basically say that the existing structure, you're not making major changes to the appearance of that structure, et cetera, et cetera. So those things sort of fall by the wayside. And there, you can get creative with respect to this. One of the reasons I don't want to see it in as a special permit is under just about every zoning statute I've looked at, and certainly in the city of Kingston, a special permit requires a public hearing. By going through site plan review, generally, I don't know whether your statute does, but generally site plan review doesn't require a public hearing, but says that the planning board can hold one. So one of the things that you can do is you can actually basically provide a waiver provision for that public hearing, or you can basically say the zoning enforcement officer, in looking at a accessory dwelling unit application, can decide it meets all of the requirements for a special for that unit, and we don't believe it needs site plan review, and just waive the site plan review at the building department level. That would be the next level of if you don't want to do it strictly as of right, that would be the next level that you could think about. And I want to reiterate that I can understand some concern if you're in a historic district or you're dealing with a historic structure, and making those commissions and boards and review processes appropriate.
So you're saying we should make this as easy as possible for people to do this. And we will have certain regulations that will make sure that they're not building some hideous structure on their property, hopefully, or not.
Well, think of this as conversion first. So conversion becomes as of right. There's standards that basically apply to the as of right uses in terms of size, the appearance of where the entrance is, et cetera, to make sure that the connections for water and sewer work, all those kinds of things. Then think of the next level, which is conversion of an existing garage or something of that nature. Then you start to think about, well, do I want that to go to site plan review? And then you start to think about, well, what happens if they want to build an accessory structure, make the bottom half a garage and make the top half an accessory dwelling unit? Do you want that? So you can think about a hierarchy of where you provide the necessary review. But the basic vanilla conversion of an existing single family residence to an accessory dwelling unit, my opinion is it should be an as of right use.
So you're saying, like, if I cut off a few rooms in my house, put a bathroom and a kitchen in, I shouldn't have to, and it really doesn't affect the outside structure of my house at all, or affect my neighbors in any way, then I should just be able to do that with the planning, with the public, the
Zoning enforcement officer.
building department, right? Just
Yep.
down
It's a code review.
Okay, but you're saying maybe if I am doing a little bit more project, like converting my garage, I might want we might want to make it a little more. We might want to look at that a little harder. And if I'm going to build a new structure on the property, we might even want to make that take a look at that even a little harder. Correct?
Well, I would, if you ask me, I would say that the conversion of an existing garage shouldn't be any harder. But if the city feels that it should be, then that's one way you can differentiate. If you want to build a new structure, I can fall further in line and say I think that may warrant some site plan review work.
All right, Dennis.
And
Thank
Patrick,
you so much.
if I could just jump in for 1 second here. The proposal that is in front of you right now, and what Dennis is speaking about in terms of 3 different levels of review, in terms of whether it can be done administratively, whether it requires site plan review, whether it requires a special permit on top of that. The proposal that is in front of you now is to eliminate the impediments that get you to the point where we are basically in the 3rd stage of review. Right now, we are even beyond what Dennis is talking about, because we have significant impediments in our code to even bringing these applications to the planning board. At this particular time, in order to even get to the planning board, you have to secure a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals. What we are proposing is eliminating that 4th level and basically getting us to the point where the planning board does site plan review and also has to issue a special permit. If the state legislation goes into effect, we are going to be forced to take this more to the process that Mr. Doyle is speaking about, where it's just ministerial and the planning board's not even involved. So again, this is a step towards normalizing this process and giving property owners the ability to go to the planning board and pitch what they want to do. Right now, you can't even get there without a variance.
And if I can, I would reiterate Mr. Gartenstein's comments in saying, no matter what you do, do something, because currently your current restrictions are just too severe that they don't work for the city.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
I just had one last question.
Hold on, Alderman Tony Davis was next, and then
Okay.
I'll let you go, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you, and Dennis, for coming here, and Dan. Just a couple questions, Dennis. And so, question is, should there be a limit on the number of additional occupants or people that can be into this existing structure? Yes.
And if I could just take that, Dennis, the proposal that's in front of you basically refers back to the New York State Building Code and says that occupancy and size restrictions will be in accordance with what the state building code says is permissible.
based on the total square footage or the number of bedrooms, or can you,
The state building code has provisions with regard to bedrooms, square footage, number of individuals. I'm not going to pretend that I know the state building code backwards and
Okay.
forwards, but what we are saying is that we are eliminating additional restrictions and just defaulting to what the state building code says.
okay. And my last thing, then, so it looks like this proposal that you guys have in front of you, is this really an easing the requirement to allow people to go through the process or initiate the process? And does it state that they will be able to build these, if you guys put some of these things in, build these dwellings or these additions, and that allows them to go through the process or start the process? Is that correct or
And the
no?
only question is what that process is going to be. Right now, there is a process for them pitching their proposal, but it is so onerous that it is impossible for them to succeed.
Okay. All righty. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Alderwoman
Thank
Hirsch, and then Alderman O'Reilly.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Morrell. I wanted to ask Dennis his opinion on doing this now, or even, I know we already spoke about not waiting for the state law to go through, but even not waiting for the comprehensive overhaul of our zoning to go through. And
I'll be blunt. I think sometimes when we have this discussion about we want to wait for a comprehensive overhaul of the zoning statute is an excuse not to do anything. And when you're in the midst of a housing crisis that you're in, the idea that you're going to take another year to essentially go through a comprehensive zoning amendment and then have all of the fights that are associated with the various provisions that are going to come out of that, it's not something that I would think is tenable with respect to trying to deal with the crisis that you have. So I would absolutely urge that the city move as rapidly as it's comfortable without having a long discussion about that this should be put off into a comprehensive revision.
thank you. It's my feeling as well. Thank you.
Go ahead, Patrick. You're muted.
Thank you, Jeff. Sorry, I keep doing that. I'm still a novice. Dennis, you had mentioned that some communities are tying the auxiliary house or auxiliary property to low income use. And did I hear that correct? And if it's true, wouldn't that deter exactly what we're trying to do? Wouldn't that deter some people? Some people might actually want to do it, but wouldn't it deter some people from building their home if they don't think they could get the full market value for their auxiliary unit? And isn't that the opposite of what we want to do, which is create housing so that naturally the prices of all housing will come down so more people can afford housing? Plus, it'd be nice if we got some jobs for people too. That's one way to afford housing, is having work is the most important thing. I mean, we can spin our wheels all day here, but unless people are actively working with good jobs, it's very difficult to afford any kind of housing, as we know.
I'm not suggesting that it would necessarily disagree with it, nor am I suggesting that if you do that it's married to affordability over a longer period of time. So what I would say to you is that I would not let the affordability component get in the way of your acting on what's before you. That's the only thing I would say. And I would say this, that what we know is happening with respect to construction materials and labor, it's becoming increasingly difficult to essentially build these units from an affordability perspective. That's a short way of saying we agree.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I don't see any more hands. So thank you, Dennis. That was very useful and very, very informative.
Always a pleasure to come down and talk to the committee. We really appreciate the opportunity and thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
again, Dennis, thank you. We
Thank
will
you.
talk. Okay, so what I believe the next step would be discussing, first of all, we can't act this evening because neither the county planning board nor the city planning board has submitted their written recommendation. The city planning board, I believe, sent a letter this morning specifically requesting another
Did
month.
everybody see that letter?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we discussed it at length at the meeting on Monday night, but they wanted a little more time to digest it, to come back with their comments. So we have to revisit this next month, so ultimately it needs to be tabled. We will be forwarding the Assembly bill, the Senate bill, for everybody to look at. So you get an idea of where the state is leaning on this, and how much further the state bill goes than what we are proposing. I would ask everybody to review that in preparation for next month's meeting. And again, rather than keep questions for the public meeting, if there are questions that come up along the way, contact our office and we can certainly attempt to answer them in the interim. This also mirrors attempts and efforts that are being made on the federal level to address impediments to expanding housing opportunities that are brought about by zoning issues. So all of this is part of a process that's underway nationwide.
Thank you.
And Michelle, I know we basically took your agenda item, so I'm going to stop talking now.
Thank you.
Okay, so so do we need a motion to table this? Okay, Robert's Rules expert says no. Patrick, did you have your hand up? Okay.
Just want to thank Michelle for working so hard on this, and this could be a very good thing for the city if it's run correctly. So that would be a wonderful thing. I can also see it not going so great too, where we overcrowd neighborhoods and streets. That so I think we need to be very careful going forward, and making sure that it doesn't, you have rights, I have rights, and we have the right to live in our home without it being impeded by your neighbors. So I think that we have to be very careful of that too, that we don't allow these structures to disturb our neighbors. They should be very thoughtfully constructed. They should take into consideration the neighborhood. There's lots of things to consider. And with this as of right zoning that Dennis was talking about, it seems like a lot of those considerations would just be, up to your neighbor to do as they will. So I think we need to really take a good look at this. I think it's a good idea, but it has to be carefully implemented so that our city and the people that live here want to continue to live here, because that's why they moved here. So if we destroy it by overcrowding it, that's a problem too. So I'm just saying there could be a downside. Let's make sure we're taking a good look at that downside as well as the upside, and making sure this works for our community. Thank you very much. Thanks, Michelle.
Can I just
Thank you, Pat.
respond
Yeah.
to Patrick?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment also, Alderman Hirsch, and then you can respond. My takeaway was that the legislation the state is considering goes a lot further than what we're proposing. And once that passes, it will override anything if ours is more strict than what the state passes, the state's legislation would override what we pass that doesn't cover what they say we should cover. So I think we should see what the state is suggesting and then base ours on to be at least as lenient as they are suggesting, not more strict. Go ahead, Alderwoman Hirsch.
Yes, I just want to say that, thank you to Alderman O'Reilly for his comments and thoughts, and they are, concerns that are reasonable. I just think that the affordability aspect can naturally play out when you're keeping your kids close and they don't have to leave the community. They can live on the property and rent. And also family, parents, as they age, we're going to have a very, very large population of aging baby boomers and a housing crisis for them. And would we as a community want to keep our families close as they age and age in place, or be putting them into congregate care settings? So I think there's a lot of pluses as well.
Yeah, I'm a baby boomer. I mean, I understand that totally. And I agree with what you said. Of course, every auxiliary house is not going to be filled with your grandmom, which would be lovely if they were, but they're also going to be filled with tenants.
You got to think about it, Patrick, too. Like, if you're the primary residence owner, you don't want that hassle in the backyard, right? Like,
no.
Yeah, so it's not the accessory dwelling unit that's going to cause the problem, it's the tenant. So the primary resident of their home needs to be very, very thoughtful and considerate, and who they then, either if it's not family members, then who they would be, renting to.
I might own several homes in the city. I might own 10 homes in the city. I don't live in them.
So I just realized that we didn't make a motion to enter into discussion. So if we are interested in continuing this discussion, I will call for a motion. Otherwise, we can, since we're not taking any action today and we're waiting for comments from the two planning boards, we can just postpone the discussion until next month.
Well, I just have one request, and I know I said I would, stop talking, but I lied. I basically, we have heard from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you. Rita, could you just tell me where you are on this? Because in moving forward in terms of drafting, I need an idea of where each individual council member is.
Sure. So I'm in favor of ADUs. I'm also in favor of not waiting specifically on what the state or the feds are going to do. I think that we should move on this immediately. However, I do think that we might want to be careful with whatever we put forth, that we're not putting forth something that the state is then going to come in and preempt, as you said. So we need to find out what's going on with them so that we all can be on the same page with everything.
I figured that's what you were going to say. I just wanted to hear you say it.
Okay. So are we
in discussion?
Are we in the, we're tabling it until next month.
Alrighty, so we didn't go into discussion then. Okay, no problem.
Okay, thank you, Tony.
Now, Tony, unless you want to discuss it further, because again, my office is working on this in cooperation with the county and the planning board, and potentially fielding phone calls from members of the community. And the more that is addressed tonight, the easier that process is going to be. I think Jeff was just pointing out that technically under Robert's rules, there was never a motion to go into discussion. So if
that's what I was saying.
want to address.
That's why I was saying, did anybody make a motion to go to further discussions? Because I don't want to.
You're not on the committee, right? So you can't make a motion.
No, I'm not. No.
Okay, so I think Tony is asking somebody to make a motion.
If you're interested in discussing, Tony, I will make a motion to enter into discussion. And Patrick seconds.
All righty, just, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
All righty, this, you know, what Patrick is saying, and I believe, you know, and I want to thank Alderwoman Hirsch for her hard work in getting this and moving in the right direction. I want to thank and Dan Garston and Dennis Doyle and for their input. And my only thing is, in as state, and yes, we do. The city of Kingston does have a housing shortage, and this is something that we should be looking into. I just want to say, you know, if any legislation, and even if this state supersedes by the, and we don't know when we're going to get that, you know, there's some discussion about how tall these dwellings are, and you know, those things need to be looked in. How, you know, can they build up a dwelling that's, you know, and 10 feet higher than what it was or something like that? Or that, those are only things I'm just putting in there of who's going to be in that discussion with that and this new legislation or resolution, and that be looked into and have a good discussion about, you know, do you guys want to put some limits on how big these structures can be from the existing structure, how tall they can be?
And
That's
Tony,
all I wanted to see.
the bulk and size limits that are already in the code that apply citywide would continue to apply to the accessory dwelling units. And I believe that's what Dennis was trying to explain in terms of the building department ministerially reviewing the application. There are
All right.
schedules in the code that apply to any structure within the city.
All righty, thank you. Okay, I appreciate that.
Any further discussion? All right, so this will be addressed next month. And the next agenda item is the regulations for boarding homes, B&Bs, and short-term rentals. Communication was sent by Alderwoman Hirsch. Alderwoman Hirsch, did you want to?
Yes, so this communication was just to further the discussion about short-term rentals. We had sent out communication for comment to the planning board, the City of Kingston Planning Board, Ulster County Planning Board, and then the HLPC. So this was, the hearing was held last night, and then this was to be the next step. But so I guess we need to address the first portion, yes. I would imagine.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Before that, I would did everybody get a chance to read the comments that we received from the Ulster County and the Kingston Planning Board? They were on the agenda. It seems like they were both, neither had a problem with. There was one, the Kingston Planning Board makes the recommendation that that we undertake a seeker review as the next step. Classifying the action because it would affect 25 acres or more, which I would classify it as type 1 action. So Dan, is that correct? Would that be the next step in the process?
I don't have the planning board's written recommendation in front of me. If you can email that to me, I will take a look at it, and we can move on to the short-term rental discussion that I believe we need to begin with an attorney-client discussion. I know Elisa had sent the attorney-client phone number, and while we're having that discussion, I can certainly multitask and look at the planning board document that you're referring to. And then
Yes.
we can come back and address the hotel definition and then speak about the next steps with regard to any amendments to the code that address short-term rentals. I forgot how did Dennis refer to our approach to this? Our elegant approach to addressing short-term rentals.
I really like that word. All right, so I'm forwarding it to you now, and just remember to turn off your cameras and mute your microphones and call the number that was emailed this afternoon. And for the public, we will be back shortly. We're entering into attorney-client session. Thank you. Okay, just giving a few seconds for everybody else to rejoin. I think Patrick O'Reilly was joining the meeting on his phone, so he'll need to call back in. Elisa, Patrick O'Reilly said he's trying to join. Could you let him in, please? I think he's joining with his through his phone. Thank you. Okay, we're all back in session. So, hi, Patrick. So, Dan, my question before we went into attorney-client, the attorney-client call was what was the, according to the responses we got from the planning board, what was the next step? You're muted, Dan.
I believe, given that it is a local law, I think that we need 2 readings, but I have to check on that. Why don't we go to Michelle and let Michelle address the issues that she wanted to speak about with regard to the short-term rentals in light of the information that I just provided to you on our phone call. And you all can discuss how you want to proceed, and I will do my research while you're doing that and multitask.
Thank you. Alderwoman Hirsch, floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes. So we had, as discussed, we looked to align the definition of hotel to match the county's definition that collects the hotel bed tax. And then, so at this point, we would also, I think that the next step would need to be determining our definition of a short-term rental. There had been a lot of discussion in the housing committee subcommittee with this, where we looked at various definitions. And Rennie can probably chime in on this, different municipalities. And then the idea of whether they will be owner occupied versus having someone else be able to take care of any issues. They don't necessarily have to be owner occupied or have an agent, in charge. I'm sorry, it's been a long day and I'm just looking at like 5 screens here. And concerns, and how do we move forward? Do we want to create a system where we're going through the building department, where short-term rentals are registered and create a permit and tax compliance and ensure a level playing field between traditional lodging providers and illegal short-term rentals. So I think that we have to look at the permitting. We have to look at what the definition of a short-term rental would be, and then what the way we would want to have the permits be done, and how we want to, whether this is something that we want to go have our building department do regarding compliance, or have an outside company help us. I sent in a proposal that was given to us by Granicus, who does our website, and they had given some data and licensing fees and things like that about how they can help enforce compliance.
Don Tollerman had a question.
Well, I'm not sure how much detail we should go into right now. And I think we just need to, but anyway, I just wanted to comment that Granicus proposal that you sent, Michelle, looked interesting to me. I don't think the building department has the capacity, at least at their current staffing levels, to deal with that new assignment and the expertise, really. So I'd be willing to consider using that outside service or another. Just a thought.
That would entail an expense, so that would have to, go through a different process than in this committee. But are we proposing then to charge a license fee to offset that expense if that's the route we decide to go with?
Well, our current municipal code, chapter 277, has a licensing. Article 1 is licensing, license required, and that aligns for hotels and motels. And then there's application for licensing, a petition for relief of licensing, and then inspection and keeping of register, terms of licensing. Like, all of this is already in the code. So
right, yeah, but my question is, would we then consider increasing that licensing fee, since this is this service is a fee that was not taken into account?
Well, there's actually no fee on our fee schedule right now, even for hotels. So,
And our recommendation, my office's recommendation, would be to consider imposing a fee associated with securing the license, whether that license is processed through the clerk's office or processed through the building safety division. There is going to be a manpower associated with that. As Michelle indicated, we currently have a section in the code that requires licensing for hotels. We also have a section in the code that requires registration of rental properties, and the process should certainly not be duplicative. I mean, what we are trying to ensure here is that all of these properties are properly registered, are properly inspected, and that we have the ability to ensure that they are maintaining the property up to a certain standard. So whether you charge them under the hotel licensing or whether you charge them under the landlord registration, is of, I mean, it's, you know, it's of no consequence. The issue is someone's going to have to do this work. And, you know, there needs to be a fee associated with it. The provision is in the statute now, and it has basically just been ignored. It's probably been ignored because there's been no money, you know, associated with it, and the task hasn't been assigned to a specific department.
Yeah, so they, so we were awaiting on the data also still to see how many, you know, properties there are in Kingston so that we can see if it's cost effective to have this company do this monitoring and data. Because if we're collecting, you know, registering, collecting a fee, it could just end up paying for itself, so.
Then, yeah, I'm just trying to access that document. I apologize. Just so I can read what that fee is for the public in case it's on the agenda posted, but just in
Right,
case.
so it's, yeah, there's a whole
Okay.
host of costs, fees, and how it would be, it depends on what we want, like what we want to have them do. So there, it's like a bunch of various modular prices that can be tailored to our needs. They can do mobile enabled registration, tax collection. I mean, some of this would not apply to us because it already happens at the county level. Address identification, compliance monitoring, rental activity monitoring. So like a year.
Yeah, and yeah, so this is posted if anybody's interested in looking it up. This is posted under today's meeting. It's not on the agenda. It's when you go on the website, it's below the agenda where it says additional information. All of these documents that we're discussing now are
And the
posted.
county does use this company already to pull in some of their information. So this, again, we wouldn't be buying into the whole thing. It would be buying into the compliance monitoring piece if that's the way we choose to go.
Okay.
And I think one of the issues that the council has to address is whether, given the information that we discussed, you know, in the attorney-client session, whether or not you wish to initiate a process where information is, you know, collected and, you know, analyzed with regard to the short-term rentals throughout the city, or, you know, whether you are satisfied that given the building department's current monitoring and, you know, the process that's in place now with code violations and police responses to quality of life issues, whether that is sufficient, you know, and that's a decision you have to make first, and then you decide how that monitoring is going to be done. If you do not believe that the licensing, as is required under the statute currently, is necessary, then you should speak about repealing that section, because currently we are not following it. So either you want it monitored, in which case you got to strengthen that section, or you got to repeal it.
Okay, yeah, I think seeing the data would help us determine that, but I'm inclined to want it to be monitored. Rita Worthington had her hand up, and then Ronnie Scott Childress.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. I think Dan may have just answered what I was going to say. I was just going to ask, in light of what we heard in an attorney-client privilege, how we would proceed. I think we needed to figure that out first, in light of what we heard. And then it also sounds like we just need to collect some more information, some more specifics and devise a plan before we take any kind of action right now.
So if we look at the current hotel licensing section, okay, and we start the discussion with the understanding that short-term rentals by definition are hotels. That section requires the city to collect a significant amount of information with regard to all of these facilities, to maintain that information, and to inspect the properties. We can certainly address how to start following that section. And then with the data that is collected, once these properties are registered, move on to whether or not, regulations and restrictions are appropriate. When doing that, we have to acknowledge that there is, pre-existing non-conforming use issues that restrict how much we can regulate short-term rentals that are currently operating and have been operating with, notice and knowledge to the county. We can't just eliminate those uses that have been in place. We can certainly monitor them. We can certainly impose reasonable regulations. But to a certain extent, we are stuck with the properties that are currently operating. And a lot of those properties are currently in zones throughout the city where they are not permitted.
So would those be grandfathered in then?
I don't really use the term grandfathered. It is what is known as a pre-existing non-conforming use.
Okay.
And basically, what it means is that the property owner has, in essence, established a degree of a right to continue to operate as they've been operating. The real question legally is how much of a right they've established. And we don't really know that because we don't have the data that would be available to us if we were enforcing the hotel section of the code. So for example, you may have a short-term, rental or another type of hotel that is currently renting out 5 rooms. Okay, we would have no basis to know if they all of a sudden decided to rent out 7 rooms because we haven't been doing the inspections, we haven't been collecting the data. Jeff is nodding.
I'm waiting for Remy. You were next.
Oh, I didn't realize you called on me. The Granicus information seems to suggest that they've done an analysis of how many units there are in Kingston and what they would charge. But I would just presume that, we would have to ask the mayor's office to put out an RFQ for this kind of a service.
Actually, I'm not sure if that's necessary. I assume there is that they have a contract that we can access through, that has been procured under the state procurement policy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if an RFP would be necessary. I believe, that there is a contract that we can access. But I mean, the real question is whether or not and how much the same type of service would cost in-house as opposed to, through an outside entity.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and what information you want.
Right. I mean, looking at theirs, it's several score $1,000s a year. So, but I'm assuming that the way that they organize that is that they would be their fees would come out of the. It's not several score. I'm sorry. It's about $15,000 a year. It looks like if you access all 5 of their. All 5 of their programs here. So, I mean, that's not a huge amount of money. But it also is that the advantage, of course, is that they offer some already developed systems. So the idea that somebody could easily obtain the license by using their phone. That seems to make it much easier to do. And I don't know that the city would have the capacity to do that right now, to develop, our own program so that it would make it easy for people to do that on their phones, or, they could probably do it online, but.
Well, is there a revenue side to this? So will we be getting fees from fines that will help pay for it?
Well, yeah, that's the idea. If we had building safety, then we would, the fees would pay, whatever manpower, person power, woman power we use in building safety, right? So the question is, do we hire somebody in building safety to do this? If we're going to require the fee and the licensing rather with the fee, or are we going to hire a company like Granicus to take care of the whole thing?
So like they actually break it down what the yearly fee then would come out to per the data they gave us. Like address identification would be $45 a year to the city per short-term rental listing.
Yeah, and the next, for me, the next slide is more apropos, because it then says, given the number of units they think are in Kingston, you're looking at the cost of $5,600 a year for address identification. And then they've got the mobile enabled registration is $5,000, but that's something that we might could do, just, have people do it online. But, I'm not sure how people would prefer to undertake that.
Right, and if there is a compliance issue, then they can just like hit, the building department can use this to hit a button and have a letter sent out. So the building department doesn't actually then have to send out, the letters.
I think the next step should be then to reach out to the mayor and decide whether this is something that that the building department can undertake, or if not, then this should go to finance to decide how we're going to collect this data. And then once we have the data, we decide if we want to regulate it or not, right?
Well, I think we need to decide if we're going to have short-term rentals register either with the building department as, per our code and as a hotel, and then decide if we're going to have them register and if we're going to have them pay a fee. Then we have to determine whether the building department can handle it, or we want to go for a company like this to help the building.
Correct. Yeah, and I think I'm from what I'm hearing, it seems like most of us are in agreement that we should have them register. Rennie Scott Childress?
It seems to me that the proper way to do this is that we need a proposal that we look at rather than trying to cobble together a proposal in this particular venue. So I don't know if we want to split up the different parts here and each of us take one of them and, add in a proposal, or create a proposal together, or one person, take all the information and put it together.
Is there a consensus among the group that there's enough concern about the 150 or so properties that have been identified by the county to warrant us taking steps to inspect them, document them, and move forward with a discussion of whether they should be regulated? I know Rennie, the answer is yes. I know Michelle believes the answer is yes. The other people on the call, do we all agree that that process should begin?
Yeah.
I would be a yes.
I mean,
Okay.
we spent we spent so much time on this already, and then for us to just drop it would almost defeat the purpose. But I do think that one thing that we have to look at, and that's important in this whole process, is the enforcement. Dan already said that it's in the code. We're not doing it now. And then to put something on top of that we have to make sure that it will be enforced before we shell out any funds, before we collect any data. That I think maybe the proposal that Rennie talked about, putting that together, submitting that to the mayor and or building department to make sure, and then hear from them, are you going to be able to handle this? If you're not doing it now, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to do it, even if we get a proposal together. So then it either is going to have to be sourced out, or we're going to have to hire someone. So enforcement is big on my list here.
And I would agree that we should start with the current section of the code requiring the licenses, and that we should be finding out from the building department what it would entail to send notices to all of the properties identified by the county that they are obligated to apply for a license pursuant to 277-2, and start that process of identifying all of these properties, getting contact information for all of these properties, and establishing what these properties are. And whether the council wishes to amend the fee schedule to include a fee for processing these applications is certainly something you're going to have to decide, but I'm not sure you have to decide it now. I think the first step is to start sending notices out to the properties that have been identified and informing them that they're obligated to secure a license. Basically drafting some sort of application for a license that adheres to the section, and starting in that manner. Once the information comes back, we can certainly look at it and decide what the next step would be in terms of how to regulate them, and what restrictions you want to place on new short-term rentals as opposed to pre-existing short-term rentals. There are a couple of things in 277-2 that I would draw your attention to that I think need to be eliminated, and that has to be clarified before the building department starts sending out notices. It currently requires that any applicant for a license agrees during the term of the license to keep and maintain in the entrance hall, lobby, or reception room a bound register with pages in which shall be plainly written the name of each guest spending the night or taking a room, the permanent residence of that guest, the hour of the day, month, and year at which such guest arrived and departed from the premises in question, and the number of rooms assigned to each guest. That is a serious and impermissible invasion of privacy, particularly the idea that that kind of registry is going to be maintained in a common space for anybody to view. Certainly there is some rationale in requiring the property owner to maintain records with regard to who has been present in the event the city needs to monitor that or secure that to confirm compliance with other sections of the code. But making that information public and accessible to any individual who walks into the facility is extremely problematic. And our recommendation would be that 277-3 be significantly curtailed, if not deleted altogether. Are there thoughts about that?
I think you're right. I would agree with what you're saying.
I would agree with that also.
So basically rewriting it to say that records have to be maintained by the property owner, and those records have to be made available to the building department for review in the context of an inspection or to confirm compliance.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The rest of you? We good with that? Okay. Michelle, were there other issues you wanted to try to address this evening, or do you want to,
Well, I
break at
think-
this point and revisit going
I
forward?
think that we should just, the housing subcommittee had pulled together some, various definitions of short-term rental. So I think that we should kind of look at that, the definition of short-term rental to add.
Do you have that with you?
I have a few of them.
And how many people on this committee were on the housing committee? One, Don was, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I can read it to you if you want, Dan.
Yeah, yeah.
The definition that we had is, and well, I could put it in the chat too. I put it in the chat there. An entire dwelling unit or a room or group of rooms or other living or sleeping space made available to rent, lease, or otherwise assigned for a tenancy of less than 30 consecutive days. The term short-term rental does not include dormitories, hotel or motel rooms, bed and breakfast inns, or lodging houses as permitted and regulated by the City of Kingston zoning ordinance.
And that definition came from where?
It's based on the Beacon's short-term rental regulations.
And were there other definitions that you considered, or was that sort of a hybrid of the various definitions that were used in other municipalities?
That was the main one that we looked at.
Okay. And Michelle, was that the definition that you were looking at as well?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't settle on a definite definition. There was a host, we looked at various definitions. So I think that we should maybe put together, like a list of definitions and then taken from all the different codes that we examined and just settle on one.
I
Maybe
do
come
know
back.
that.
Come back next month and do that.
Yeah. I mean, looking at the definition of short-term rentals, I know when I was looking at it and looking it up, that 30 days was in there. I do. So I think that's consistent throughout.
Yeah, and that's makes it a short-term rental versus
Right.
Long-term.
Patrick, you have anything on this?
Yeah, it sounds like we need to mull this over a little bit. I think the mayor needs to take a look at it. I think the building department needs to take a look at it, and we need to get some more information next month and come back and revisit.
I meant specifically about the definition.
Do I like that specific definition? I'd like to see some other ones.
Okay. Is Tony still on?
No, he's not.
Okay, so what I would propose is that we put together a, or that either Rennie or Michelle, having participated, or Don having participated in this discussion, forward to the rest of the committee the various definitions that you looked at, and the definition that you are leaning towards. Everybody take a look at it. We'll come back to it next month and try to adopt a definition that would be added to section 277.11. I will provide, or I will draft an amendment to the subsection that we just, 277.3, that reins that in a bit. I would ask everyone to, look at 277 as a whole, to familiarize yourself with it. There are other provisions in there that we're going to have to revise and or delete. And then hopefully next month we can actually, start, passing, legislation to start addressing this.
I have 15 or so different definitions of
15.
short-term rental, so I'll be happy to
15 of them.
pull from those and send some stuff around for folks to consider.
Can you pick like your top 5?
That's all?
Well, you know,
Yeah.
we're not all professors, Rennie.
I forget that.
Yes, I know you do.
So yeah, I'll be happy to do that. And I'll send those around in the next 2 days.
Okay. And then the next thing we have to address, now that that's addressed, is which relates to this, but it's a different item on the agenda, old business, is the changing of the term hotel. We've already changed it in 2 parts in 2 different places, but this last part was to change it on the city zoning code so that it is consistent throughout. We had referred it, as Alderwoman Hirsch said, to the Kingston Planning Board, Ulster County Planning Board, and HLPC. We received comments. We had a public hearing last night. So now we are basically, we have to move on with it. So what's the next step, Daniel said, is to vote on it?
It is in fact a type 1 action, so you have to declare it as such. What actual document we have to prepare in connection with it being a type 1 action, we will be addressing between now and caucus and or the meeting, whether we can do it with a fairly generic environmental impact statement, or whether there has to be a more substantive discussion about that. I think that it clearly is an action that has no significant adverse impact. The only question is how to document that for the record so that the action is valid. Does that make sense?
So the committee report would read to declare the changing of the definition of the word hotel in the City of Kingston zoning code as a type 1 action under seeker.
Correct.
Okay. And do I have a motion? Motion by Rennie Scott Childress.
And actually, Jeff, if you can add language that just says and adopting findings of environmental significance as attached, and
Okay.
we'll address that between now and caucus in
Sure.
terms of how that document needs to be prepared and how those findings need to be made. If we don't have it prepared by caucus, it can certainly be kicked over, but that, certainly leaves us in a position where we can attempt to finish this month.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, yes, it does. So, okay, what Dan said, do I have a motion?
I just had a question for Dan.
Yes, go ahead.
Just a clarifying question, please. So we're going to do this step because of the one piece where it pertains to the zoning code, like I think section 405, correct? And then changing the definition in the other areas of our municipal code will require a local law, correct? Updating it? We just can't.
No, we already changed the definitions in the other sections of the code. So there is nothing about changing the zoning code that precludes you from moving forward with adopting and implementing regulations of short-term rentals in the rest of the code. Okay, this is just addressing the zoning piece of it and, putting that in conformance with the rest of the code. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense to everyone else?
It does. So we have a motion by Alderman Scott Childress. Do I have a second? Second by Rita Worthington. Any other discussion? Okay, hearing no discussion, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Okay, and then the last item on the agenda, the last item of old business we had was the definition on the amending of the zoning code relating to chickens. I've been in communication with Eric Kitchen. His workload is terribly full, so he hasn't had a chance to get around to working on the language. I'll continue to work with him on that, but he has asked if this could be postponed for another month, so he can come back with some recommendations. So, okay, do we need a motion to table this or no? Okay. Well, we're not technically tabling, we're just postponing the discussion. Yeah, so, all right, so that concludes the agenda. Any other, anything else that anybody wants to discuss? All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Rennie Scott Childress, second by Patrick, all in favor? All right, good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
everyone. Thanks
Have a
for
good night.
having me, Jeff.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.